So welcome everyone to Kinexum's webcast on Japan's fast-track regulatory pathway for cell therapy, presented by Rob Clarr, the CEO of HekaBio K.K, a Japanese regulatory strategy firm based in Tokyo. So a couple of housekeeping details first. While you're listening to the presentation, please place your microphones on mute so we can optimize the sound quality for everyone. Second, if you're only calling in, but you have a chance to log in via the internet, I'd urge you to do so you can see the slides that Rob will be sharing and talking to. Third, an audio recording and a separate file containing Rob's slide deck will be posted on our Kinexum website, probably by the other side of the weekend. And fourth, if you have any questions of Rob's during Rob's presentation, please enter them if you can in the chat function of the Uber conference platform. You can open up the cartoon comment bubble icon in the right column of your screen, and then Rob will address them at the end of his prepared remarks to the extent possible. Just for a little background, Kinexum has been advising a client about the regulatory track and indication prioritization for a cell therapy program, and we have collaborated with Rob in fleshing out a possible Japan strategy which could lead to conditional approval in Japan within several years, which is very different from cell therapy regulatory development in the US or the EU. So this is a fascinating prospect, and we thought it'd be important to spread this information via a Kinexum public webcast. So I now, Rob, if you don't mind sharing your screen and showing us the slides, I want to turn the mic over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see, share. Right.
I'm in, Rob. I don't know about others.
Okay.
I see the Inception endless mirrors. Here you go. I see a slide.
Yeah. Is that showing up okay?
Everybody?
Yes, I can see it.
Who's online? Super.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks so much. So, Rob Clarr, HekaBio, thanks so much. Very happy to speak about what's going on in Japan in terms of the opportunity to initiate development there quickly and hopefully also get early conditional approval for regenerative medical products. So here's how it all started. We're on page 2, executive summary. Professor Shinya Yamanaka's Nobel Prize in 2012 is really what started it. And given that Japan was in some financial doldrums at this time, Prime Minister Abe and his inner circle decided that this was a great opportunity to try to unleash a gold rush that could also spur the entire economy. So Nobel Prize in iPS cells really kicked this all off. We began to see talk about IPS around then. It's on everybody's radar screen. Everyone in Japan knows regenerative medicine, cellular therapy. These all of a sudden became household words among everyone. And so the regulatory framework came out, and this was spurred by people around Prime Minister Abe, people involved with regenerative medicine. A guy by the name of George Hara, who was and still is a healthcare policy advisor to Prime Minister Abe, came up with this idea for a new fast-tracking regulatory framework to enable early conditional approval. That was written in as an act in November of 2013 and became law November 2014. And subsequently, that fast-tracking program has been copied also for medical devices and drugs as well, so that it can be used for other types of programs. And so we're 5 years into the new regulatory framework, since nearly 5 years since November 2013. So we wanted to take a look in talking with Thomas and Zan about, what's the reality on the ground here in Japan 5 years on. And what we've got right now is there are currently 3,500 programs going on that are patient pay, doctor-initiated programs. There's 143 investigator-initiated clinical research programs and 61 clinical trials for registration. There are new associations around regenerative medicine and cell therapy. There are a number of new companies who have come up with ways to benefit from the ecosystem that's being developed, including new companies getting into the game of selling culturing media and other ancillary products to support the research and culturing that's going on. However, the difficulty we're seeing is getting products approved. So 5 years in, there's still only 4 programs that are approved and being sold with regulatory clearance and among the regenerative medical products. Our contacts at the authorities and so forth tell us that there's a number of products that are still going to be approved yet this year. So we're going to start to see kind of a domino effect of approvals coming in. We've kind of reached the tipping point of having been into this new regulatory regime for several years, and the approvals are going to start coming in. What we think is that approvals are going to be faster if there are people who are experienced in dealing with the PMDA and the PMDA's regenerative medicine group. Having those people on board on your program is going to be helpful. Last week, I was with the head of Fujifilm's regenerative medicine group, and we'll see in one slide in a moment that Fujifilm, of the 4 approved programs in Japan, Fujifilm's subsidiary JTech has 2 of them, and they are obviously they're not promoting themselves as a consulting company, but they're available to help mentor companies going through the process, given that they're not competitive to whatever else Fujifilm is doing. But the head of regenerative medicine at Fujifilm, she told me just last week that they're there to be helpful, and they want to be seen as a partner for PMDA activities as well. So that was an interesting finding. Also, partnering with the best fit KOL physicians is extremely important. And I believe everyone on the phone will understand that as a given, and probably you'll also understand that doing that in a culture that is not always as transparent as our own is sometimes a challenge in Japan. So to figure out among the KOL doctors that you're looking at, who has also ability to have clinical influence when the product gets commercialized, who's going to be useful for reimbursement discussions. Does your chosen group of KOL doctors have a lot of enemies or friends around the country? These kind of things, and where people went to school and who's connected to whom, are very important things to know, and not so easy to do up front, but necessary. In addition to the early conditional approvals available for regenerative medicine programs, Japan has some other fast tracking programs, including Orphan designation and the Sakigake program. And there's, I don't believe we'll get into the appendices in today's deck, but in the deck, for your interest, if there is interest, there's a full list of programs involving cellular therapy that have also gotten Orphan designation, and programs in cellular therapy that also have gotten this Sakigake designation. And some of them are foreign companies, which makes it interesting. So there are some good examples there, and some good examples to follow. So collaborating with the PMDA during clinical regulatory process is critical for success, and leveraging your KOLs and working with experienced companies is also important. Those are the takeaways that I'd like to suggest for today, and I'll get right into the deck then. Here's our table of contents. From page 25 on, it's mainly appendices. So here's where we are. This is our remaking of the original concept that came out in 2012 in several different magazines and newspapers, that was suggested by George Hara, other advisors around Prime Minister Abe, and this is the one that came into reality in the Act of 2013 and the Law of 2014. So it's a way to truncate clinical trials to be very quick, get the conditional approval, and then the PMDA will then negotiate with you on the number of cases that are required for reapplication during the post-marketing surveillance term. The maximum term is set at 7 years for conditional approval, but the PMDA may say, you know, we'll give you 100 cases in 5 years and then resubmit within that time. So there'll be a negotiation like that during the conditional approval period. And these are the currently approved products. There's 5 listed here. One is a indication expansion, the one at the top. So it's JTEC, the two at the first ones at the bottom. Those are Fujifilm subsidiaries. Then Heartsheet, the Teramo program. Heartsheet and TemCell were approved on the same day in 2015. One is Heartsheet from Teramo. The research program was driven by Osaka University and Professor Sawa and his group down there, and they got that through in a conditional approval based on 7 cases. TemCell, JCR Pharma, was in license from Mesoblast, and this was granted orphan designation, priority review, but they have a normal approval on this. It was not conditional approval because their clinical program was already underway, and they just went through with a normal approval on that program. And by the way, you don't have to pick if you're going to go for normal versus conditional approval right away. That it depends on negotiation with PMDA throughout the process. And here's how the first conditional approval program actually worked. So it's a single arm, 7 subjects, done all in one center at University of Osaka. And then they needed to do 180 subjects with 60 on the treatment and 120 subjects under control. So that's how that went. Let's take a look at, on this page, at how the regulatory framework is written and what it means for people trying to get into Japan. So there's really 2 sides of it. One is the Safety Act, and the other one is the PMD Act. The PMD Act enables the approvals through the PMDA. The Safety Act is guaranteeing safety through essentially the MHLW, the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare. Now, the purpose of the Safety Act was twofold at that time. Japan enables a lot of leeway for individual doctors to do whatever they want in their own clinics. And we don't hear a lot about this just because the normal teaching hospitals, university hospitals don't allow that kind of thing to happen. But for private clinics, rejuvenation clinics, cosmetic clinics, there was a time in Japan where there was a lot of unproven stem cell therapy, quote unquote stem cell therapy going on unproven medicine, and unproven, unmonitored safety. And the MHLW wanted to put an end to that. The new law gave them an excuse to put that in there. So they wanted to shut down all programs that couldn't withstand some level of audit, and they required everyone to stop cellular therapy and get yourself certified and get yourself registered. That's number one. Number two, they required you to register your medical care plans. The medical care plans are still the patient pay. A lot of cosmetic clinics can still do their thing, but they need to register the plan. Besides having their facility registered, they also have to register the plan and get that approved. And they also need, and it also provides for clinical research. Clinical research, which are essentially physician-initiated studies for research purposes, enabled under the Safety Act. The second one, so that was kind of putting the brake on the wild west of cellular therapy going on in Japan at that time. There was a death actually of a Korean patient who was given a dose of something or other in Japan and died back in Korea. And so this was, Japan saw this as a way to regain control over the safety. At the same time, they wanted medical institutions, particularly larger medical institutions, wanted to have the opportunity to subcontract the culturing and processing. And this was the one accelerating aspect of the Safety Act, that it became possible then for companies to do that. And it's interesting. So there are a number of smaller and growing CDMOs in Japan now, and there are a number of companies that are wanting to get into that business as well, who are not normally in that. I was today with people at Roto, which is a company that is mainly a food and OTC drug company, but they've decided that their MSC-based programs are something that they want to sell directly to hospitals, and they want to have hospitals order to them to manufacture the cells and deliver. So they're just building that new business now, and I had the opportunity to talk with the head of that business today. I thought that was interesting. And the second part of the act is the one that we see that's publicized, and that's the PMD Act. This is an overall rewriting of the Japanese PAL, the PAL, Pharmaceutical Affairs Law. It's now called the PMD Act. As far as regenerative medicine is concerned, it enables early approval, conditional approval, and full approval can be obtained later with more comprehensive studies and follow-up, as we saw in the earlier chart. Here's how that looks. Safety Act on the left, PMD Act on the right. And these are the people involved. So the Safety Act in blue is maintained by the ministry and not the PMDA. The PMD Act is maintained by the PMDA, which is part of the ministry, but an independent government organization. That's how that works. So let's take a look at how the implementation is going now for the Safety Act. We said earlier that facilities now need to be registered, and this gives you how facilities need to be registered and under what types of committees. So there's high risk class 1 facilities, facilities that can register if your program is high risk class 1. In other words, iPS cells, ES cells, gene therapy, then and also CAR T are classified as class 1. then you need to actually get the opinion and the approval from the MHLW. If it's a middle risk, normally autologous cells with some transdifferentiation, then registering with the MHLW through independent evaluation committee is sufficient. And lower risk, class 3, autologous programs that don't have transdifferentiation, these can be just submitted through a less stringent certifying committee. And authorizations of cell processing facilities. Outside the hospital, there are 63 companies that are now licensed to process and store cells. And hospitals go through a slightly different process for notification. So, but it's important to note that around Japan now we have 2,512 hospitals that are notified, that have a certification to process and so manufacture and store and transplant cells. Oh, I forgot to mention on the left side, there are overseas companies that are also accredited by Japanese MHLW, 5 out of Korea and 1 in Taiwan. And here we take a look at the number of medical care programs that are approved right now in Japan. So class 1 programs are not medical care, not the patient pay programs. They're the clinical research programs, a total of 18. Class 2 programs, 146 medical care and 64 clinical research. And then class 3, which are a lot of autologous cell therapies without transdifferentiation, simpler ones. This is where we get into the simpler, and many of them may be going on at through patient pay programs at rejuvenation clinics and so forth. So normally this is not of our interest. The 3,391 class 3 medical care facility focused programs, we in our world anyway, and I think most of the people on the call would be more interested in official clinical research programs that are going through early stage clinical research with KOL doctors here, with a view to proceeding to actual clinical trials for registry purposes. And this is actually a full list of ongoing clinical research programs now. And you'll see that the certifying committee listed as the hospital. So this is for your reference at your leisure, I think. That's a list there of the different universities and hospitals involved. A lot of Osaka University. It's probably the most common one here. Yep. And these are the most recent 2 new clinical research programs that have been approved by the MHLW, Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare. I just wanted to call your attention to these 2. Very interesting that this is a embryonic stem cell clinical research program that will be actually used in babies. So this is a really interesting approved program here coming out of the National Center for Child Health and Development. The next one to call your attention to is just back to our friend, the iPS cells, and Professor Sawa. So it just kind of comes full circle back to IPS that got this all started through Professor Yamanaka's Nobel Prize. But these are the current programs that are involving iPS cell therapy now. The first one that started was age-related macular degeneration. This is the company behind this one particularly is called Helios. whom you may have heard of. They're out of Tokyo and also growing overseas. And other programs are in planning now, but 2014 saw the first human usage of iPS cells, and then 2016 saw the first allogeneic human use of iPS cells. And this one here, which is the most recent approved clinical research study under the Safety Act, is the severe ischemic cardiomyopathy, which is done at Osaka. Will be done at Osaka University by Professor Sawa. You probably remember Professor Sawa was the one who got the heart sheet through research, which was the Terumo approved product in 2015. Our team took a look at the over 200 Class 2 clinical research and medical care programs going on in Japan, and we wanted to classify those according to what types of cells are being used and what types of programs they are. So this kind of shows the location in the body and the types of cells. And it's interesting that quite commonly adipose derived MSCs are most commonly used, but they're not the only ones, obviously, on the Class 2 risk-based programs. Let's take a look at the other side of the new law, which is the PMD Act. And this is the one for the purpose of approval for commercialization. So the basic tenet here is that regenerative medical products became the third arm of the PMD Act. So you got drugs, you got devices, and now the third one is regenerative medical products. This is the definition that was originally put into the law. It's a little bit controversial in the sense that it's specific to the use of live cells. And there's discussion about whether this will change, whether other types of material that induce regeneration in the body could also be considered regenerative medicine or not under the PMD Act. So these are things that are in discussion. At the moment, the definition is for live cells. And under the PMD Act, the number of clinical trial notifications, similar to IND, that have been submitted and approved for cell therapy and gene therapy are a total of 61 here. It's interesting that investigator-initiated studies can still be official clinical trials that can go all the way through to registration. And here's our list of clinical trials classified as tissue engineering or cellular therapy. I don't think we have the full list here. There's a few more, but these are the ones that we were able to find. It's possible that some of the ones that are approved trials haven't initiated yet or haven't listed themselves under UMIN, which is Japan's version of clinicaltrials.gov. But these are what we were able to find. Hopefully this is a useful list for people. And then the next one is clinical trials classified as gene therapy. Our information is that the ANGIS program, their hepatocyte growth factor for CLI, this is likely to be the first gene therapy approved in Japan yet this year. That's what we believe will happen. Okay. I think, yeah, I don't want to really dig into too much detail on other early access schemes of ODD and Sakigake, other than let me just jump here really quickly though on page 28. So orphan designation for regenerative medicine products. It may just be interesting to note the companies here that have orphan designation. And we see JTech here, the Fujifilm subsidiary. We see Novartis here. And we see other Japanese companies. Anyway, that's a list for your reference. And then Sakigake is another one. I'll jump to the chase here. Sakigake is another fast tracking program for the which enables you to have a concierge to help usher you through the program, and this will lead to a faster approval theoretically. This program requires that there is a Japan first aspect to the program, but it doesn't have to be a Japan originated program. And you'll see, and the reason I wanted to show this is because the bottom two programs that you'll see, two of the three that were approved in the 2018 round are actually US companies. I thought it very interesting to note that this law, the purpose of this law is that is to foster in Japan, first in Japan development. So as long as there's a particular aspect of the program that is a first in Japan aspect, then you can qualify for this, and seems to be worth it. Although I must say, the other day I spoke with someone who was on the point, the point end of being on the requiring to be responsive to their PMDA concierge, and they felt that you know, normal orphan designation or even normal fast tracking response time from the PMDA, when the PMDA sends you questions and you need to respond, and oftentimes get back and forth with a US or European counterpart, and therefore it's two languages and need to get back to PMDA in a week on 250 questions. It's really, really tough. And it's even tougher when the government is trying to promise you a faster track. That also means you need to be even faster in your own responses. So I did hear that there's a possible downside to the endless acceleration that the program promises. Just something to consider. Okay. And that's the end of our deck. With that, I'll end the show and go back to answer questions that anyone may have.
Rob, thank you very much for that great survey of the Japanese regulatory schema for cell therapy. I've typed a couple of questions in the chat box along the way, and I'll just start reading a couple of them to give other people a chance to collect their minds. First, we saw some Western companies, Novartis, Janssen, Amgen. What is the general awareness, in your view, in the West of this expedited Japanese regulatory track? And is there a growing number of Western companies pursuing a Japan strategy? What is the representation among the hot, sexy, advanced therapy development programs that have visibility in the West?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. I think things have entered a new phase recently. So immediately after the new regulatory scheme came into effect, we saw a lot of overseas companies coming into Japan, participating in summits and partnering events in Japan, hoping to partner their asset because they saw Japan as a way to potentially get high reimbursement. They saw the reimbursement environment in the U.S. worsening, and they thought, okay, we can get a even if so, the Japan regulatory regime now enables us to come to Japan and partner our asset and take some money out, which helps us in our home country operation. And I think there were a lot of companies that came to Japan and ended up disappointed in inability to license programs. I think there are a number of reasons for that. Probably the number one was that the number one is probably that most Japanese companies were so focused on, as the Japanese government was, on IPS programs, and they didn't want to hear about many of the overseas autologous programs, particularly that were being presented. So I think the tide has changed now, whereas many of the companies that announced themselves to be all IPS all the time in the early days have now realized that they need something that's going to be quicker to market, and as IPS programs are not quickly moving through their enrollment. And so we see greater interest in more programs, and that includes overseas programs. So I think we're moving from an age where Japanese companies wanted to see what was going to happen with their internal programs, and we're moving to a phase where the appetite for programs that are going to be more likely to work, and that may have some better proof of concept from overseas. I think there's more acceptability to that. So most of the companies we saw early on were wanting to partner their asset, not develop in-house. But we did also see some companies wanting to at least take some initial steps in developing in-house.
Great.
As well.
Barbara, I see you posted a question there, but I'm sorry, go ahead, Rob.
Oh, no, go ahead.
You done?
Yep.
Okay, I wanted to get my second question in, and then we'll go to Barb's question. The Japanese CDMO industry seems to be getting a jump start over others because there's a lot more material to work with, programs to work with. Are they building a widening lead as a global leader in cell therapy CMC, or is that more at the local level, serving local hospitals?
Very good question. Yeah, I think I think that remains to be seen, and I must admit that I don't know so much about what's going on overseas. I know, however, in Japan, there's still interest in building up CDMO capacity and capability, and I know that the Japanese government is eager to see that happening as well. We saw, was it Sahi Kasei, I believe, that acquired PCT, and there are other mergers and other acquisitions going on from Japan. So I believe this is something that Japan is eager to continue to build up. The market at the moment looks like, we've got 2,500 hospitals that are licensed to do cell culturing, but clearly for commercial purposes, there need to be other solutions. And I don't think Japan has the capacity to do that quite yet. I think there's more that needs to come in in terms of capability and capacity from overseas as well.
Interesting. Barbara, do you want to pose your question?
Oh, sure. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I was just noting on one of your slides in the definition of a regenerative medical product, you had said it means that it's processed, or in other words, more than minimal manipulation. And this is clearly a major concept in the US FDA laws. So I'm wondering if that phrase in Japan was more or less borrowed from this U.S. concept of minimal manipulation. And I'm wondering, is it defined similarly, if you have any insight on that? Thank you.
Yes, I think the language comes from, I think the language does come from the U.S., but I'm not sure I understand perfectly the reason behind the language in the U.S. law, but I think I do remember that it used to be that it was that way because of safety and who could do what. Whereas I think the intention is that's not necessarily the intention of the Japanese one here. I think it's using the language from the U.S., but I think it's just trying to exclude things like blood transfusion or bone marrow transplant.
Okay. Yes, you're right. In the U.S., it's more of a delineation between here is when you don't need to get FDA pre-approval, and if you cross the line, then you do need to get FDA pre-approval. So anyway, that helps. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Art, do you have a question?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Someone
good.
has a dog barking in the background. Just if you can go mute whoever has a dog barking in the background, that'd be helpful. Thank you. Go ahead, Art.
No animals in my house so far. No, it's just in terms of efficacy. Have any cell-based therapies that are not immunologic, that is, immune cell lines, red blood cell formation lines, and the like, shown good efficacy? For example, what's popular in the U.S., although I haven't seen any good efficacy, are stem cell lines that are purported to be cartilage producing, and they're given to people with osteoarthritis. And I know it's done actually fairly commonly, but they're like the hospital-based programs in Japan, not drug companies trying to develop them as therapies.
Right. So the therapies that are showing good efficacy beyond the rejuvenation or the unproven products that are there for patient pay programs, I think commonly MSC based programs are if you look at the Mesoblast/JCR Pharma, the acute GVHD program must have had some efficacy. I know several of the investigators on that program. They seem moderately impressed anyway. Let's see. I would have to think more about that.
Yeah, anything in the diabetes field, beta cells that are, say, grown in tissue culture, microencapsulated. I'm just throwing this out as a possibility. Has anybody got any good phase 2 data from that type of therapy?
Not yet, no, but there's certainly a lot of interest in that area, that's for sure.
Okay, thank you. Great presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Thomas,
this is Zan. I have some other questions, but Zan, go ahead.
Well, sorry, I'm not able to see the attendee screen, so I'm butting in. But first, let me just note that it's almost Saturday morning in Japan, And it's just remarkable that we have this web conference going on, hosted from Japan by Rob Clarr, who is not just a Japanese expert, but really has contributed to our understanding about how to develop advanced therapies within Kinexum. He has collaborated on 2 advanced therapies that Kinexum has going on right now. We have a total of 4, and I hope that we'll get his involvement in the other 2 soon. But it's clear that Japan is a country we should know about, just because on behalf of our clients, we should know the resources that are available there, starting with Rob, but as a way to get going quickly and perhaps get to patients sooner and to the market sooner. Japan is really a very important area to know about. And so we're grateful, Rob, that you're giving us that insight and for all the other ways you've contributed to our programs. I'd also say that it's not like other regions in the world are standing still. In fact, there are other countries that are very aggressive, some even more aggressive, India, for example. And so there's a spectrum of different opportunities and challenges for cell therapy and other advanced therapy development. And we need to have some sense of that. Even those of us who start out in the traditional small or mid-sized molecule drug area, we now need to know about what's happening with advanced therapies. And in many cases, we're finding clients are coming to us for help in that area. So again, it's just great that we at Kinexum and our friends who have called in are getting the insight that Rob has to offer. And finally, just to say a personal note about Rob, a terrific individual, and he's become a dear friend in just a very short period of time. Rob has been in China for 30 years, and he speaks a little bit of Japanese.
Japan.
Oh, I'm sorry. What did I say? He's been in Japan for 30 years, and he speaks the language like a native. So he's a rare bird in many ways, and we're just delighted to see he's part of our family.
Well, thanks so much, Sam. I really appreciate that.
To elaborate a little bit, Zan, on what you said and to thump our chest a little bit, Barbara, you were asking about minimally manipulated. Actually, one of our expert consultants on the CBER side, Joey Cavagnaro, was there and helped shape that original language. I don't know, it was a decade or so ago. So we do have cell therapy expertise on the U.S. side. And Rob is a great resource for teaching us about Japan. One comment I had, I guess, along the way in your presentation, Rob, was that it was surprising to me the small numbers, the N of several dozen, I guess, that led to the conditional approval and then on to sort of additional proving trials, clinical trials. I apologize for not fully understanding. This is not sort of an IND where you can now start clinical investigation. You have to do clinical investigation post-approval, but it's also a marketing approval, is that right? That's one of the things that I think people who are familiar with FDA and the EU regulations, some people have expressed a question mark about just how safe this is, and maybe you can comment about what findings, what the experience has been on the ground in Japan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one way that we're splitting it out is that the physician-initiated clinical research, which are the ones that we showed earlier in the deck. Those are the ones that are not for the purposes of registration, but
right.
Yeah, so that's the earlier research. And then the clinical trial notification, which we call the CTN, similar to the IND. So you submit that to the PMDA within 30 days. If they don't tell you no, then you can proceed with your clinical trial.
Right.
And those are the ones that are for the purposes of getting an approval. And so, yeah, so well, I guess it's helpful to note here, because you mentioned the safety aspect, Thomas. So, certainly the PMDA, they need the company to come up with the story that supports the rationale for the product itself, the preclinical rationale and results, and then also the CMC aspect. And so this is certainly something that's time consuming for many companies to get all those box checked before being able to submit their CTN. But that's the way that the PMDA ensures safety.
Right. We've addressed questions that are in the chat box. Are there people who are calling in who have questions and haven't had a chance to get their word in edgewise? Rob, it sounds like you've been pretty comprehensive in answering, or either that or you're introducing a topic that people need to digest. What I suggest is it during the 1 o'clock in the morning time frame for you, Rob, just to remind people again that the slides and the recording will be made available, so you may have follow-up questions after studying the slides. And Rob, I don't know if I'm volunteering you inappropriately, but I think we can furnish your contact information. So we'd be happy to carry on a conversation about this topic beyond just this particular hour webcast. So maybe, Zan, any closing comments? Otherwise, I thought maybe we could close the call.
Just again, many thanks to Rob and to our far-flung audience. It's just great to have this global village that tunes in to learn together.
Super. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining. Just to let you know that we will be discussing U.S. and EU regulation of cell therapy in a future Kinexum Friday webcast. I mentioned we have expertise certainly of our own, such as Joy Cavagnaro. Our next Kinexum Friday call would take place in 2 weeks on June 22nd, but a number of Kinexum consultants will be attending the American Diabetes Association Annual Congress in Orlando. So the next webcast will be on EU medicinal product regulation by a member of the EMA on Friday, July 13th. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today and wish you a great weekend.